As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, friends. How are you doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning. Peace and blessings to all.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I want to especially thank Tom Ficklin for giving us the opportunity to come on the show and educate our community, because there's so much going on that's impacting our community on a negative basis. And so many of us have no idea. And I just see the different things that are going on. And I say, we have got to wake up and we've got to stand up and we've got to fight back against some of this stuff that's going on. Because if a lot of people say, oh, I don't get involved with politics. And I remind them, politics is running your life. So you should be involved. And so I got involved decades ago, and I thank God because I'm learning so much. I actually see a lot of this law as white supremacy being codified in law, and no public scrutiny and no real resistance from the communities that are mostly impacted. So I thank Tom for this opportunity to come forth, and I thank you guys for coming on. I love both of you and the work you're doing, and you've been there. You're not one of those people who just come out for the moment. We've been in this for years, decades, and we have to continue working until we change things. And so I want to start there, but I want to start with something before I introduce everyone. And it's something that I keep in my mind, because a lot of times people want you to be always think of peace first when you're trying to change the law. And everything can't be about peace all the time. We try our best to be peaceful, but the reality is we can't always be. So I always kind of remember this phrase, or this little quote. It said, if peace means a willingness to be exploited economically, dominated politically, humiliated, and segregated, I don't want peace. If peace means completely adjusting to a deadening status quo, I don't want peace. If peace means keeping my mouth shut in the midst of injustice and evil, I don't want that peace. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the existence of justice for all of our people. And until I see that kind of peace, I will continue my fight. So again, thank you so much. Claudine Fox, ACLU, tell us a little bit about you.
Oof, that's always a deep question. My name is Claudine. I am the Public Policy and Advocacy Director at the ACLU of Connecticut. I've been with the organization for 2.5 years now, and I've been in the role of Policy Director for the last 1.5 years or so. I have been involved in some kind of advocacy, organizing, justice work for as long as I can remember, and have touched many different systems, all at this idea of what it means for people, marginalized people, to really experience equity and relief from our oppressive systems. So I've worked in the food justice arena. I've worked in the federally qualified health center arena. I've worked in AmeriCorps. I served on city council here in Hartford for 1.5 years. And now I'm at the at a health equity organization, and now I'm at the ACLU. And the theme of all of it has really been trying to get at the root of why our people are suffering, right? And I don't think I realized that's what I was doing, way back 10 plus years ago. But, my time here at the ACLU has really helped me recognize oh, snap, that is my mission. And that's what I'm supposed to be doing, is holding people accountable for the decisions that they make every day, be it the politicians or the actors that are violently involved in, keeping our people down. So,
Yes.
when I was on city council, I thought this was the way that I could shape change. And I was like, oh no, this ain't it. I need to be on the outside, like holding the people in this seat accountable. So that's how I ended up here. And that's just really like my mission in this work. So
Powerful sister.
yeah.
and I have to say that I agree with you. People have talked to me about going, why aren't you in Harvard? Why don't you do this job and that? I said, no, I think my role is on the outside, because I found too many times when people get into those systems, they get they get co-opted into those systems as opposed to changing them. And so I feel better on the outside. So I agree with you. Thank you, Mr. Brother Mohammed, powerful brother. Let's hear from you.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Good to see you all here today. My name is Daeed Muhammad McKnight, and I'm just a brother who is involved in the struggle because I'm concerned about the issues that affect our community. I've worked in the field of reentry and criminal justice reform probably for the last, officially for the last 12 or 13 years, family reentry, and also some things that we do on our own with Mr. Kenny Jackson and Fred Hodges. And Mr. Kenny Jackson kind of kicked the door open to set up a model of effective reentry as a frontline service provider. People coming out of prison are having people with lived experience who were formerly incarcerated involved in the process. And this model is, they use the word quote unquote evidence-based model, but it's evidence-based because of the results that's yielded. At one point in time, some of the brothers and sisters who came through the program, their recidivism rate was less than half of the state's recidivism rate. I guess the proof was in the pudding. That Kenny told them from the beginning, if you want to develop a reentry plan that's effective, a reentry program, then you're going to have people who have lived experience directly involved in the process. So that's been my journey. And along the way, we've gotten involved in all the things that reentry and criminal justice reform encompasses. But one thing I want to say before we start the dialogue is that Sister Barbara said something very important about people on the inside. And I think one of the major issues is that, people that's listening out there in the listening audience and those of us up here, I know this is not a confessional, this is not professional, but I'm saying no matter what drug you might have used, marijuana, cigarettes, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, no matter how intoxicated you got, there's nothing more intoxicating than power when it is unchecked by moral discipline. So one of the issues that we have are internal issues on the inside of politics. So that's been the problem that we have faced, that people have been in power, have not been people that have been able to control their lower desires, and they allow those lower desires to dictate what they should do that is not in the act or the intention of justice, equity, and fairness.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, again, thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to talk about some of the policies that we are pushing this legislative session. Some of them are things that we've already started. Other years, some of them been like, 5-10 years in the making. That's one thing that I also notice about any policy that tries to correct some of the injustices against African American, Latino, takes years, decades to actually happen. And so that's something else that needs to change in politics, because I've seen other communities come in with some policies that they want to change, and it only takes them a session to get it changed. So that's one of the things we got to work on. But yeah, so let's talk about the policy that you guys are pushing this year, SB 5390. Tell the community about that.
First, I'd just like to start and say
it's HB, right? Is it SB or HB?
HB. Yep, HB. No problem. We hope it just turned into LAW, into law.
Okay, yeah, that's what we want.
But But no, I just want to say that this is something that me and Fred and myself have been working on for maybe 10 years or more. And at one point we were mentioning it, and it's to repeal the cost of incarceration lien on people who have been incarcerated and who are incarcerated. In Connecticut, that could happen to you after 20 years after your release. And I know the listeners here that are not familiar with it probably say this sounds like insanity, but a person could serve a 30-year straight sentence, 30 calendars of their life, pay for the crime, provide the state with what they required of them, which was 30 years of their life. And then after they're released, up to 20 more years, if they're injured in a car accident, if they receive money from the inheritance of wealth or an insurance policy or anything of that nature, there could be a lien put on it for them to pay for the cost of their incarceration, which they could take up to half. And the funny thing about it is that Connecticut, they use this word all the time. It's a windfall. It's not a windfall. In legal terminology, it's to make you whole if you're injured in an accident. This is not a windfall.
Right.
Life is a windfall. So after a person has served their sentence, even upon sentencing at court, where it says fees and costs associated with this crime, is in a transcript, shall be waived. There's a lien still imposed on you after a sentence was imposed on you by your rights of the 14th Amendment, the due process of the United States Constitution. And fact of the matter, Connecticut's not the only state who uses this law, but a lot of states have woken up to what they call smart criminal policy. The ACLU calls it smart justice. And they have repealed this law in portions and components of it, but Connecticut still has this law in full scale, and they are the only state in the country, and we are supposed to be so progressive that extends it out to 20 years after your release.
Wow.
Me and Fred have been working on this for almost 10 years, and when we first mentioned it to legislators, a lot of them really didn't even know about it, and they were shocked themselves to hear of a law such as this. And the funny thing about it, and I'm just trying to get all this information out because I know we're limited on time and I want to leave space for Claudine, is that this is not only morally wrong, but there's some layers of legal issues here. So you take a person like me, case in point, a person like Fred, who were affected personally by this, and I was incarcerated for about 17 and a half years. I've been out for 16 and a half. I still got 2.5 years hanging over my head for me to be affected by this law after I've been out almost 17 years. And you think about a person like me and him who was sentenced in the 80s, and this law didn't come into effect until 95, 96 under the Rowland administration, which is pretty ironic. Here's a man that went to prison himself, and he ran his campaign on get tough on crime in prison. Not get tough on crime, get tough on crime in prison. And as a result, the collateral damage of that is they took the college out, education out, reformatory programs that were there for treatment. And they even took out boxing programs, all kinds of things, and then came up with this ridiculous law of charging you for your incarceration, which is double dipping, because you may have been a taxpayer before you went to prison. You already paid for your and somebody else's incarceration. But to make a long story short, people like me, there's issues of ex post facto, meaning after the fact, which the law states that you could be grandfathered into a new law only if it's more of a benefit, but not more harm.
Right.
So you think about it, to give you a perfect example, if we were sentenced in the 80s, the law came out in 95, even though they say it's not a punishment, is indirectly attached to a criminal conviction. So it is a punishment, whether they want to play semantics with the law or not. It affects me where we're grandfathered into a law that didn't even exist when we got sentenced.
Yes.
If you ask them for an itemized bill, they tell you you're charged at a flat rate of $220-something a day. Well, how could that be when even if it was fair to charge you with this, the cost of incarceration was different in 1980-something than it is now. So how could you charge a flat rate for the whole time you've been in prison if you've been in prison for more than one different time period of time.
Yes.
There's a lot
And
to
on top of that, Connecticut is the state that charges the highest rate,
The highest rate.
$225 a day for incarceration, more than many hotels charge, who have amenities and gyms and food and all that stuff included.
I was about to say that. Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to end on this note, is that the perfect example of the ex post facto is here. When we went to prison in the 80s, you were under a good time law that said you got 10 days a month.
Yes.
And after 5 years, you would get 12 days a month off of your sentence, right? If you didn't lose it for misbehavior, misconduct, right?
Yes.
Now, later on under the Rowland administration, they took good time away. When they took good time away, they didn't grandfather us into that because they knew it would be against the law. They grandfathered into this, a law that didn't exist. So we continued to get our 10 days a month good time, but the people that were newly sentenced, they were under the new law and they were subject to that. So that's an example of why ex post facto is important in this situation. Yeah. But thank you, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure we got the version of the information out.
Yeah, people need to understand because so many people have gotten money taken from them already, and they don't even have a clue that you're even out here fighting this. Because for me, at the end of the justice trail, those people who got this money taken from them, they should be returned that money. Because, you know, like you said, $225 a day, and they were back then, what were we charging? It's just insanity, and that's why I testified on that bill. And so, like I said, we have to move on because time goes really quickly. But thank you so much. I'm going to come back to this, but I'm glad you at least got the points out that people need to know. 20 years after you've been incarcerated, Connecticut can come after you for and charge you $225,000 a day, as though you were in a hotel on vacation. And then you think about the fact that people have died in there. And let me quickly talk about that before I move on to Claudine. Robbie Talbert died in New Haven Correctional Center at the hands of the correctional officers. They pepper sprayed him, chained him up, put him in isolation. When they went back, he was dead. And do you know they charged his mom for every day that he was incarcerated, including the day that they killed him? How insane is this system? So I'm going to have to move on because there's a lot that can be said. So take a breath, and Claudine, I want to bring you up to talk about some of the policies you're trying to fight up in Hartford. And by the way, I'm in full support. I've been testifying everything on all of your bills because I support you guys because I know you're doing the right thing. So thanks, Claudine.
Barb. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dai, for, kind of laying that groundwork, right? We were at the Capitol on Wednesday morning, and I was out. I left the ropes to go take a phone call, and someone actually stopped me and asked me about your bill. And they were like, wait, I heard, is that something that they can really do? Like, what is this? And how can we help? I was like, write a letter to your legislator. I don't remember the bill number because I didn't remember it, but 5390, it's in my head now. I was like, if you just Google prison debt legislation, the bill number will come up, and write a letter to your legislator and tell them exactly everything that you just said to me about how bonkers this is. So people, the news is spreading about this, and people are hearing about how bananas, how even more bananas. You couldn't, with everything that we know already, right? Like all the good work that Barb has been doing around ending solitary confinement, and just all the other people that have been trying to take chops at the system of DOC. This is just like one more surprise where people are like, it cannot get crazier than this. It literally cannot. And then it does. So thank you, Dai, for the work that you're doing around this. Smart Justice is a campaign centered by people who are living with a criminal record, right? And Dai again laid out the exact reason why people who have been through this system need to be at the center of the solutions and not just the center of the problems, right? And that is exactly what Smart Justice is trying to model at the legislature, which is you get really, really, really great and succinct and exact policy solutions from the people that have lived that life. And so this year we have three priority pieces of legislation that we're paying attention to and that we're working really hard to get across the finish line. And they each take a stab at the different ends of the criminal legal system, right? And so how we've been terming it is the back end and the front end of the criminal legal system. The back end is what happens to a person after they have exited Connecticut's prisons and jails, right? So what 5390 is trying to do, what the clean slate legislation that was passed last year with everybody's hard work on this call right now. It's really looking to adjust and provide relief for people after they have done their time and paid their debts to society. But what we found is that it's not only enough to think about what happens to a person after they have exited Connecticut's prisons and jails, but what are we actually doing to stop people from getting in the system in the first place? How are we addressing the root causes of societal failure? Today, my earrings say no one wants to be poor. And that's just like, that's really what it is, right? Is like, poverty is like the driving reason as to why people are getting caught up in all of these systems the way that they do. And so what we have to start doing, along with making sure that people aren't falling through the cracks, because you can't stop doing that work, right? Is what are we doing to hold the people accountable every day that are making the decisions to have people end up in the system? So the bill that we have been working on for a number of years, probably since 2019, I think, which addresses the back end of the criminal legal system, is our collateral consequences legislation. Last year, we've discovered that there are over 550 barriers that a person faces that we know of as they are re-entering their communities while living with a criminal record, right? And those barriers are, as y'all both know, housing insecurity, finding quality employment, healthcare, getting a license, basically just trying to move on with your life after you've done your time and paid your debts to society. So like if someone came out and they wanted to be a barber, right? Like you actually have to get a license to be a barber in your community, but a criminal record can hold you back from doing that. And so this year, our bill HB 5248, which is looking at the collateral consequences of a record as it relates to getting a license, a lot of folks that have gone to prison and come home and have turned their lives around want to become social workers, want to be people that are like helping people that were like them when they were younger to divert them from entering the system in the first place. But the way Connecticut is set up right now, these folks can't get the license that they need to do to be therapists, to be social workers, to do that good work that they know they are supposed to do. And Connecticut is systematically holding them back from being able to do that. So 5248 is taking a stab at removing that barrier for people. And there are a lot of people in the Smart Justice campaign that are going to school for social work or are going to school for sociology or are going to school to, one, make sure that they can rebuild their careers and rebuild their lives, but because they want to do good work. And as I'm talking about this, and I think about like what it means to be the son or a daughter of a person with a record, and if we don't do what 5390 is trying to do, our families, it's not just about the people that like are living with a record being impacted by this crap policy, but it's their families too, right? And the generational harm that mass incarceration has caused. So 5248 is taking a look at what happens to a person as they're trying to gain licensure in any kind of career here in Connecticut. On the front end of the criminal legal system, we have two bills that are Senate bills that are looking at the two primary actors responsible for driving mass incarceration. And that's the police, and that's state's attorneys and our chief state's attorney and prosecutors. So SB 306 is addressing the fact that police can basically lie to people in custody to get them to confess to a crime they may or may not have committed, actually. And so we are working with the Innocence Project on this particular piece of legislation, who have connections to so many people that have gone to prison, wrongfully been imprisoned because the police coercively forced them to confess to something that they didn't do. And coercive confession can be anywhere from saying, you're never going to see your parents again if you don't say that you did such and such, or you were here at such and such time, to stopping people from being able to go to the bathroom while they're being interrogated, or doing any kind of physical body language that threatens a person and makes them feel like they have no choice but to say the thing that the police want them to say. So SB 306 is really trying to address and abolish that practice of police being able to lie to anybody that they have in custody. SB 307, which is the bill that, like, if you see, I have to like practice restraint when I talk about prosecutors and state's attorneys.
Yes.
It grinds my gears, yo. I just, prosecutors operate largely in the dark, right? Like, we all know this. We know that state's attorneys and the system of the Division of Criminal Justice is basically this like ivory tower that can do whatever it wants to obtain a conviction, or to make sure that, you know, they've got what they consider wins on their caseload, versus really trying to do what's best for everybody involved in whatever case they're moving through our court system, right? We've, in 2019, Smart Justice and so many other community partners worked to pass the Prosecutorial Transparency Bill, which is now Public Act 1959, which basically charged DCJ and OPM with collecting data around demographics and who is actually getting caught up in state's attorneys and prosecutors' net, essentially, right?
Yes.
And what we're seeing as this data collection is coming out is largely the people that are ending up with the most harsh convictions, or ending up being sent to prison, or not having their cases dismissed, or experiencing any kind of relief, are Black and Latinx people, right?
No surprise.
No surprise, right? And so that with this, you have to call out racism. You have to call out how people are predisposed to just assume that Black and brown people are doing the worst and had the worst intentions, right? And sometimes it's conscious, sometimes they are consciously doing this, and sometimes it is subconscious, right? And there is no shame in admitting that bias and white supremacy is a driver for a lot of the actions and the reasons why we do things.
Yes.
So, I told you I get hot when I talk about this.
Oh,
so with the Transparency Public Act 1959, the data is proving our hypothesis and what we all knew to be true. Yes, Black and brown people are experiencing the harshest outcomes in Connecticut's prisons and jails, regardless of if prosecutors and state's attorneys are aware of it or not, right? What SB 307, an act concerning prosecutorial accountability, is trying to do is take that data and apply it, right? We don't believe in collecting data just for the sake of collecting data. It really is about what we're doing and how we're trying to address the problems that the data is exposing, now that everybody can see it and numbers don't lie. So what we're trying to do is, state's attorneys are appointed to their positions. Connecticut is like one out of 4 states in this entire country where state's attorneys are not elected. Other states refer to them as district attorneys or DAs or whatever, but we don't elect our state's attorneys. They are appointed to 8-year terms, and they go those 8 years without any meaningful check-in or oversight from the Criminal Justice Commission, the body that is constitutionally charged with making sure that they are doing what they are supposed to do, right? So we've got these people that have all of this power serving 8-year terms with no meaningful check-ins, no meaningful way to determine how their 13 judicial districts are actually running, and how the health and quality of life of those communities in those 13 judicial districts, right? So SB 307 is really trying to ensure that state's attorneys are at least coming in front of the CJC biennially, so every 2 years, just to talk about what is happening in their district. Because of the data collection that's happening from 1959, we're also trying to ensure that that data is disaggregated by judicial district, not just state pie in the sky, high elevated information collection, but what's actually happening in each state's attorney's district. And now you got to talk about it. The CJC has a right to ask questions about, why were 70% of Black people that came in front of you actually charged with a felony conviction instead of a misdemeanor versus, 30% of white folks, right?
Yeah.
Which we are finding that is actually happening. Those numbers aren't the exact numbers, don't hold me to that. But that is how disparate the outcomes are right now. So SB 307 is really trying to take another at the system of the Division of Criminal Justice to make sure that the actors that are making decisions every day are actually being held accountable or have to speak to the decisions that are happening in their districts every single day. So that's what we're doing. Front end, back end of the criminal legal system. It's not easy. People are afraid to hold, as we see with the police accountability bill, all those rollbacks happening now, what we see with the system of DOC, DCJ, people are afraid to hold these folks accountable. And we just can't, that just can't be anymore. People are dying out here. So that's what we're working on. Sorry, I took so much time.
And thank you so much for that work, because it is really, really important work. Getting the data just supports what we've been saying for decades. There's a lot of things that are going on now that, I said that 20 and 30 years ago, but I didn't have the data. See, now with the data, like you said, you can't deny the data collection. We've known for years, over 90% of the cases in places like New Haven, probably Hartford and Bridgeport also, over 90% people are plea bargaining.
Yes.
Is it because they're guilty? No, because they know they cannot trust this system. And they have this policy in place. If you want a trial, then if you lose, you're going to pay maybe 3 times what they offered you. So of course, that's coercing people to just go ahead and say, I'm guilty. So when we talk about the prison system, people will say, well, don't do the crime. You won't have to do the time. Well, many of those people didn't do the time, but they cannot trust this system to bring them justice. And so they just go ahead and say, okay, I'm guilty, because they say, if you're offering me 5 years and if I take this to trial, I'm gonna get 15. What do you think they're going to say? Guilty or not? Oh, I'll take the 5 years, even though I didn't do anything. I'll just take the 5 years, because I can't imagine 15 years for something that I didn't do. So thank you very much for this work that you're doing. And like you said, it's like I'm more excited about the fact that you guys are doing the what you call the front end work. Because police and the prosecutors are having this power to decimate our communities, and they've been getting away with it for decades. Now you see a lot of these prosecutors are coming right out of school. They're souped up on the power they have, and there's no talking to them. They're looking for convictions because they think convictions, what has always been thought anyway, the more convictions, the more likely you are to rise in this system. And so they're not seeking justice, they're seeking a conviction, even if they know that they can't win that case. But if they can get the people afraid enough to challenge the system, then they know they have another conviction under their belt.
Exactly.
And so that's very important. Yesterday, there was actually coming together of people in the city talking about this new gun prevention program that they want to bring to the city. Now, when I looked at all the characters or who were put together to do this work, it's the same old people that we always go to. And I'm sitting there screaming, like, if you keep using the same people to do the same thing, why are you expecting a different outcome? And it breaks my heart, because I see our kids getting shot on the street, dying, going to prison. I see all of this stuff happening. And like you said, no one's really addressing the root causes, because I see these people as pimping our pain. They are getting paid for as long as we're in despair, providing these programs that do not work. They don't have to show accountability that anything is effective. They just continue to get funded for years and years and years just because people know them or through nepotism. And in the meantime, our kids are dying. So it just upsets me every time I see this kind of thing. happening. And I'm going to be quiet for a moment and take a breath and let Brother Muhammad come back in.
Now, I just wanted to say quickly, thank you so much, both of you guys, for what you said in reference to what's going on in the struggle for justice in the criminal justice system. And I just wanted to say real quick, let me first thank our team that got the legislation to the point that it's at.
Yes.
Professor Sarah Russell from Quinnipiac University, Professor Jenny Carroll from Yale Law School, and Professor Anna Van Cleve from Yale Law School, and all of their students, in particular, Mila Reed Guevara, very, very helpful. And Mr. Nolan, Representative Nolan out of London, he was the first one to come to me and Brother Fred's aid, say, hey, we need to do something about this. And we collaborated with him. And then we collaborated with the rest of our team. And then eventually, Mr. Steve Stastrom, Representative Steve Stastrom out of Bridgeport, and Mr. Gary Winfield out of New Haven, both of these guys, co-chairs of Judiciary, they introduced this bill into committee, and we appreciate what they did. And then I want to say real quick on what you was talking about, Barbara. This is just some community reflection on the legal justice system in Connecticut. You know that in Connecticut, the numbers may be slightly off, but close to 70 to 83, 85% of convictions are done by an antiquated method, which is not used in a lot of states anymore, called the Alfred Doctrine.
Oh, yes.
Agreement, plea negotiations. So there's no trial. There's maybe only 15 to 20% people go to trial on the convictions that are convicted in Connecticut. Now, the reason why this thing isn't used anymore, because technically it's really unconstitutional. When you get a chance, you can read the case of Alfred versus North Carolina. And when you start looking at this case, they came up with this because the man was saying it was to prevent him from getting the death penalty. It allowed him to say he was guilty without saying he was guilty.
Yes.
But this is contradictive to what the law states. The law states in Black's Law Dictionary that you can only be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by trial of your peers or upon one's own admission. So this technically, the Alfred Doctrine is illegal, and they still use it. Yeah. How can you tell a person that is not knowledgeable of the law, they're a layman of the law, and you tell them, plead under the Alfred Doctrine, where the person states, I don't admit guilt, but I concede that the state has enough evidence to convict.
Yes.
How could I know that if I'm a layman of the law? I have no way to assess evidence. So this is based off of a recommendation that my attorney gives me. And if my attorney is giving me a recommendation to plea when he haven't had a chance to assess all the evidence himself, now it's a question of whether my plea is voluntarily and intelligently made, which affects the plea agreement, whether it can be accepted or not in a plea canvassing hearing before you're sentenced. So there's a lot of different things going on.
Yes.
I'm not going to wear you out with this, but there's a lot of things that are wrong that need to be addressed, and that's one of them. And I've really been surprised over the years why the Alfred Doctrine has never been challenged in Connecticut.
And I think it may be because I didn't realize, like you said, that that's the only way that they can actually get a conviction, if you admit it or you it happened at trial. So, and I know I'm pretty intelligent around these issues, and I really look into a lot of this stuff. So you're telling me something I didn't know. So like you said, the average layman has no clue. Many times average layman is just whatever the attorney's telling them to do, they'll do it. Like the attorney may say, you know, if you go to trial, you're going to get 15 years. If you say no contest, then you're saying, okay, I don't have enough. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm guilty and away, because that's what you're doing, saying you're guilty. And you're saying because, like you said, because the state has enough evidence. That's not always true. But we just go along with what the attorney tells us to do. And this is how the prosecutors have gotten away with these injustices decade after decade after decade. Knowledge is power.
And on top of that, we've got a public defender's office that is forever operating on a shoestring budget with way too many clients and not enough attorneys. And so they're unable, even if they wanted to, they're unable to actually invest the amount of time that it would take to appropriately defend a person to make sure that their lives aren't completely thrown away to the system. And prosecutors take advantage of that in all the ways.
Yes, they do. And so the time is really winding down. So I want to talk about the other bill that I'm really pushing, Stop Solitary Connecticut. And again, we've been working on this since 2016, 2017. They gave us a little watered down bill. And so here we are in 2022, 2021, we did get it passed, but the governor vetoed. So here we are, 2022, 5 years later, still trying to push us to at least get on a path to ending solitary, because we're not going to end it with our bill, but at least put us on the path. And then, so our bill is SB 459. We're looking for definitely accountability for what's going on inside of our system, because that's one of the things that DOC is one of the I think it's the only state, matter of fact, that I think about it, that does not have oversight over their prisons. So they've been pretty much able to do what they want. There's been articles that have been written that talked about how bad a job they're doing, but nothing has, there's been nothing to say, okay, well, you should be doing this and you're not, but there's no accountability. So we're looking for oversight and accountability. What we put in our bill, we want an ombudsman who will work alongside a civilian oversight crew. And the reason we wanted civilian people, because I'm always afraid when a person gets inside of these systems that they're going to be co-opted. And I let the commissioner know from the start. I wanted to be completely independent of Department of Corrections. The civilian board is going to be people who have actually been formerly incarcerated, family members. We have a DOC official on there, so we can't completely leave them out. We want to have an attorney on there and people who have showed a long history of caring about the well-being of people that are incarcerated. So we're looking to do that. The bill is also looking to, even though we're not going to end solitary, but actually significantly reduce the use of solitary. There's a level 4 prisons where people are defined by UN law, 22 hours a day, you're in isolation. That's called solitary confinement. In 2020, for the second time, United Nations has went against Connecticut prisons, have cited them for their use of isolation. Still, nothing has happened. So we still have to fight, even though the United Nations saying that we are treating people inhumanely and abusive and torturing, and we should stop all of this. Nothing has happened. So we're going to have to put a bill out there, law, to make it happen. And also we want to promote transparency. There's people inside, there's hundreds of people who die inside of prisons every year. And without that data, we would never know that. I look at cases like 19-year-old Mr. Neely, who died of organ failure because he had lupus. They were just giving him Motrin, and he ended up 19 years old. And then another kid, more recently, 19 years old, died because he was his cellmate had tried to get Department of Corrections officers to come and help him because he was having a hard time breathing. We have the video that was put out there that showed that the COs were taking their time walking, like it was no big issue. And by the time they got there, he was dead. 19 years old, he hadn't even been in prison that long. Same thing with Mr. Neely. So we're losing people all the time, young people whose lives are being taken. And to know that on top of that, if the family sues, then here's DOC saying, oh, well, yeah, we might have caused their death, but wait a minute, they were in prison for all these years. So you're going to have to pay for all the time that they were in prison. People are coming out of prison with chronic illness, debilitating diseases. They're coming out of there with a lot of cardiovascular, diabetes, side effects from the medications that they prescribe like candy. There's so much stuff going on in prison. people are going in there whole, but they're coming out broken and fractured. And some of them will never recover from the treatment that they're given. And that's why to be charging them is just insane to me. So I want to shut down for a couple of minutes and let either one of you, if you wanted to add something to it, because the time is really winding down. So Claudine, can I get you in here to talk some more about some of the work that ACLU has been doing for many, many years?
Like what? Which one? What?
Just talk about the collateral consequences that you were talking about that people are facing. Now the bill's in place. Have you seen any action that shows that people are really getting their lives back together? Enforcement of the law, or people saying, well, you know, the law's here, but, you know, I'm still facing a lot of barriers.
So the collateral consequences bill has not been signed into law yet. Last year, it made it out of labor, but died on the House floor because there was so much happening last year.
Okay.
And so this year, it has made it out of labor again with full bipartisan support. And our champions, Representative Robin Porter and Senator Kushner, have really been making sure that this is the strongest language possible, because it is very easy to weaken this and make it like a do nothing bill that does nothing for people that are just trying to move on with their lives, right? And so what I mean by do nothing is we can say and make the gesture that it's important to ensure that people have access to being able to get a license for a particular job that they want. But the real nitty gritty questions are, who are we making responsible for the decision to be able to move forward, right? And it is far too easy to put that responsibility on the people that are living with the record, rather than the deciding bodies that are in power that approve or deny a person's ability to be licensed, right? So one of the things that's really, really important to us is ensuring that we're holding the Department of Public Health and the Department of Consumer Protection accountable for, if they say no to a person who wants a license, they need to tell them why and what they can do to be able to access the license, rather than putting it on the person trying to apply for it to prove that they're worthy, to prove that they're, that they, a lot of times you find that folks have to relive their criminal conviction when they are applying for housing, a job, something like that, to prove that they are worthy of being able to participate in whatever system it is, right? And the thing that we really, really want to make sure of that doesn't happen is that if we're going to ask a person to disclose their criminal conviction history, then we need to make sure that there is a 3-step process that if a person is denied, it is because they have hit the nexus of these 3 things: how long it's been since they've been out, how substantially related their conviction is to the license or the job that they're applying for. So if you rob the bank and you're trying to become a bank teller, then, and what you've done to really move on from the worst time in your life, right? So what classes you've taken, how have you tried to rehab yourself to make sure that you are the best person possible, right? And these are honestly all things that everybody, regardless of you're living with a record or not, should be trying to do. What are we trying to do to be better people in our societies every day? And what we find is that people in power can pick and choose who needs to prove how worthy they are. And so this collateral consequences bill is really trying to make sure that we're not creating a second-class society for people living with a record. So the hope is that once it gets called on the floor, it continues to remain the strongest language possible, so that we're not continuing to saddle people who are already struggling with one more barrier to be able to move on. So that's kind of that's the heart behind the collateral consequences bill, is that people just want to work. 95% of people that go to prison come home. Why are we just not letting them work and rebuild their lives? I don't get it.
Yeah,
so,
you served your time. So it wasn't a life sentence, so you shouldn't have to.
No.
But when we talk about this licensing thing, I always think back to, I've been around long enough to realize that that this is, for me, is part of white supremacy being codified into law. Because when I was growing up, my uncles and father and grandfather, they did electrical work, they did the plumbing work, they worked on cars, all of these things. They didn't need a license, but this is a way, this is how they slip it in, and you don't even realize what's happening by saying, okay, now you require a license to do that. And they do that because many those licenses require you going to school, having a certain amount of education, having the finances to be able to do and having the time to be able to do these things. So if you're working 2 and 3 jobs, you don't have time to go to school. You certainly don't have the money because you're working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep your family going. So what do? Put into law that in order to do these jobs, you now require a license. And then on top of it, well, if you ever do anything wrong in your life, now, even if you are good at your job, you can't get a license. So we have to look at the bigger picture of how these systems all came into play, and I always say they did it one policy at a time.
Yeah.
And so when I say right now we need to be talking about how do we disrupt these systems, we have to do it one policy at a time, the same way they built it. And people can't even hear dismantle because they see that they can't even envision how do we dismantle. And I say simply, the same way they put it together, the same way we tear it apart.
Yeah. And this will be I feel like my mission here is to really do that, right? Like my background is in public health. So I think about like community and just undergrad, right? I don't have an MP. I hate school, but whatever. I think if we actually start looking at how systems of oppression are impacting like the well-being of our communities, it's a lot easier for us to understand what it means to actually move towards abolition and what it means to like invest in people rather than continue to take things away from them and expect them to survive rather than thrive, right? So like, really, when we start looking at the front end of the criminal legal system, we're really looking at how we are actively divesting from important things like having quality housing and affordable housing, having a good job that pays you a living wage in Connecticut, not $7, $8, $9 an hour, because that's not living wage here, right? What does good public education look like for our kids? What does it look like for kids to have access to, after school programs to keep them busy and enrich them and nourish them? Why do we continue to invest in DOC? Why do we continue to invest in policing that actually does nothing to prevent crime from happening? And what does it mean for us to like look at prevention from a holistic perspective and not just this like narrow gun crimes keep happening, so we need to do gun crime prevention? What does it mean for us to like really look at the big picture of if people are happy and taken care of, we will see crime dramatically drop.
Yeah.
What if we started looking at a community and a world like that?
Absolutely. And Barbara,
go ahead.
If I may, real quick, I just wanted to go back. Excellent point, Claudine. I wanted to go back to Barbara's point. So it seems like to me, naturally, these laws are affecting people. If it's in the criminal justice system, we happen to be the majority. So we're directly affected by it. But it brings me back to what Barbara was saying. Every time a freedom was accomplished, there was an unrealistic bar set that could not be reached. And you think about after slavery, during the Reconstruction period, the maximum amount of African-American legislators were put into Congress during that period. Then came Jim Crow, and then you had these ridiculous black codes and laws that were put into place, like for a person to vote now, you'd have to know how to sign your name. You'd have to guess how many jelly beans were in a jar. This is insane. Unrealistic bars that were set every time a freedom is accomplished. So now in America, you use the disguise of 9/11 to stop people who are born American citizens, to stop them from driving a cab, getting a PSL license, being a security guard. But a person who is an immigrant, who's not an American citizen, a million people can drive the cab. They can be a security guard. So it's hidden in plain sight. And I just
it definitely
back to that point.
It definitely
Thank
is.
you all.
And the war on drugs, that as soon as civil rights came in, what happened 5 years later? Here come the war on drugs. And who was impacted the most by that? Us. And so then with the mass incarceration, now it's costing too much money. So let's put a lien on people who go to prison. So we got 30 seconds left. So I just want to tell people Sunday at 10 o'clock, watch Face to Facts on NBC. I will be one of the people that they interviewed around solitary confinement. I want to thank both of you, powerful people, for coming on this show today. And thank you so much for all that you do. And we're going to continue to tear this system down one policy at a time. You can bet on that.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Have a blessed day.
You too.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, let's get